So this is part of my Story Repairing the World series. I'm going to talk today about my journey through the Massachusetts courts. And for anyone who's dealt with emotional abuse, narcissistic abuse, bullied, who wants to turn your challenges into opportunities, this story, true story, is for you.
Jon Myers was hit with 30 years of unfathomable challenge. The gentle genius emerged by turning challenge into opportunity. You too can learn this groundbreaking psychology.
So the part I want to focus on is the development of a legal understanding of emotional abuse. My story goes back 30 years in this regard, and it started with a divorce situation, separation divorce, where I chose to dig in, for my children and this kind of thing. And it mushroomed because, it's not about my ex-wife and me. My ex-wife sorrowfully passed away in 2016, almost 10 years ago. It's more about family dynamics that pushed this whole situation. So it was, people who were coming at me in a way. And it really gets into the whole understanding of narcissism, psychopathic, but really emotional abuse and how people will act from their fears and insecurities and come at other people. And the piece I want to focus on today a bit is raised with a civil rights background and a budding seed of fairness, which grew into a mighty oak. And the main thing was that, when I went into Massachusetts courts, and those have seen with Karen Reed and all this, some of the slant of courts, how that can be. And I was really dealing with unfair things, and a lot of people were coming at me. And I really decided, this is not going to happen to me to the best of my abilities. I'm going to stand in here for fairness. I'm going to stand in for decency. I'm going to stand in for my children. And it really grew, and I developed this understanding as the divorce situation subsided over the years, and still I had family dynamics still coming at me, something called the tort for the intentional infliction of emotional distress. And that's a law which isn't well understood, but when you think about it, intentionally inflicting emotional distress, and I read it and studied it over the course of 20 years, I realized this is really accurately describing how one would respond to emotional distress and or emotional abuse. And society doesn't really understand the whole element of emotional abuse. I've said it's like oxygen. It's an invisible quality, but it really, and also like an iceberg effect, where we see behaviors like 10% above the surface, and 90% or so is functioning, is operating below the surface. So I developed this. I've raised situations in legal settings for going back 20 years. In terms of the tort for the intentional infliction of emotional distress, gotten as far as this U.S. Supreme Court a couple of times. And clearly people haven't, grasped it. What I'm getting at now, too, is that I've developed an understanding or an approach now where I have a serious or relevant, brief and appendix before the Massachusetts Appellate Court. And I really see it as, this is like magnitudes above anything I've done before in terms of its thoroughness, its documentation, going strictly by the rules of procedure and all this kind of thing. Not that others were bad, but this is really a higher level. And I see it as, in Massachusetts courts, in my view, and I say this lovingly, and I only because I've been here going on 46 years now, that, need to realign towards our basic doctrine of fairness. If the appeals court, the MASJC, is located at something called the John Adams Courthouse, then we've got to live up to those ideals, and courts are not aligned. And in Massachusetts being the toughest place, I say lovingly or begrudging, kind of place, I think we've got to make that shift, and we've got to gear towards something higher, align with those John Adams types of ideals. So my advocacy is not only to develop this understanding of emotional abuse and really helping people understand and seeing how Courts will make better decisions by understanding emotional distress, emotional abuse, but also in terms of really helping Massachusetts and America and the world align with these values of liberty and justice for all, because that's where the breakdown in society is occurring. We've got to, Massachusetts is having these street takeovers and things, and we've got to get back to, or even move forward to a sense of real fairness, real equality, and respectfully and lovingly demand our systems align with this sense of fairness. And that's gently, what my Gentle Genius coaching, you can take a look at the website for training, coaching, and mediation. But that's gently what my advocacy about, respectfully requesting that people look at these issues of emotional distress, emotional abuse, and make sound decisions. I brought a groundbreaking advocacy, and also but to understand how these, understanding the real psychology of our times ripples out into scenarios beyond just ensconced in the court system.